The echoing steps. My wife's last message from beyond. Chapter 1. The silence after the song. October 2024. Salem, Massachusetts. The name itself, thick with history and shadows, felt particularly fitting this year. My home, an old Victorian with its turret and gables, usually hummed with life, a warm, vibrant symphony. Now, it was vast and silent, a mausoleum of memories. I am Evelyn Holloway, 65 years old, and this past year has been the cruelest of my life. 6 months ago, Rose, my wife of 40 years, was gone. A sudden, brutal heart attack. One moment, we were laughing over a crossword puzzle. The next, her hand had gone cold in mine. Just like that, the light extinguished, the music silenced. Rose, she was the laughter in this house, the vibrant color that filled every corner. Her infectious giggle, the way she hummed off-key as she cooked, the gentle tap-tap of her knitting needles, the incessant, joyful clatter of her gardening tools, and her steps. Oh, those steps. She always wore the same old, worn-out house slippers, a soft, scuffing sound that was as much a part of our home's rhythm as the ticking grandfather clock in the hall. A familiar, comforting shhh-flump, shhh-flump as she padded from room to room. It was the soundtrack of our lives together. As a retired literature teacher, I've always lived by logic, by reason, the tangible, the provable. Grief, I knew, was a monster. I felt it gnawing at me, the sleepless nights, the pervasive ache of loneliness, the deep, hollow void where her presence used to be. I was prepared for that. I was not prepared for this. It began subtly, a whisper in the periphery of my awareness, a soft, familiar sound just beyond the edge of hearing. The shhh-flump, shhh-flump. At first, I dismissed it. Exhaustion, I told myself. Grief playing tricks on my mind. The house was old. It settled. It groaned. Sounds carried. Maybe a loose floorboard, or just the phantom echoes of a deeply ingrained habit. My brain, clinging to the familiar, creating an illusion. But the steps grew clearer, more distinct, more insistent. In the mornings, a faint, descending sound, shhh-flump, 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 coming down the main staircase, just as Rose used to. I'd freeze, my tea mug halfway to my lips, listening, waiting for her to enter the kitchen, to hum, to ask about my day. But the sound would fade, and the silence would rush back in, colder, heavier than before. The kitchen would be empty. The tea would grow cold. In the evenings, an ascending rhythm. Shhh-flump, 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 climbing the stairs, just as she did every night before bed. The sound would stop outside our bedroom door. I'd hold my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the familiar creak of the door, the soft sigh as she settled into her side of the bed. But nothing. Just the silence, the empty space beside me. Sometimes, late at night, I hear it from the kitchen. A faint rustle, a soft clink, the distinct sound of the cupboard door opening, the one where we kept our special herbal teas. Rose loved her chamomile. I'd creep out of bed, my heart a frantic drum, tiptoeing down the hall. The kitchen light would be off, the cupboard door closed. Nothing disturbed. The aroma of brewing tea, of chamomile, a mere phantom. I tried to rationalize it. stress, grief-induced auditory hallucinations, my subconscious playing cruel tricks. I wrote it down in a journal, trying to find a pattern, a logical explanation. Dates, times, location of the steps. I scoured the internet for scientific explanations of phantom limb syndrome for sound, for grieving processes and their bizarre manifestations. But the fear began to creep in, a cold, insidious tendril wrapping around my heart. What if it wasn't just my imagination? What if I was losing my mind? Or the most terrifying thought of all, what if something truly was happening? Something beyond logic, something that defied my pragmatic, rational world. And what if it was Rose? And what if she was trying to tell me something? Or simply that she was still here? The once comforting rhythm of her steps now haunted me. Each soft shhh-flump was a nail hammered into my fragile peace, driving me closer to the precipice of a terrifying unknown. Chapter 2. The Therapist and the Tap-Tap Code. The sleepless nights became unbearable. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, became amplified, distorted by my heightened senses. I dreaded the evenings, the approaching darkness, the solitude of the house where Rose's ghost steps played out their phantom dance. I started turning on every light, leaving the radio playing softly, anything to fill the void, to drown out the growing whispers of the inexplicable. But the steps persisted, weaving through the noise, becoming more insistent, more chillingly clear. My book club met weekly, a lifeline to a semblance of normalcy. One afternoon, sipping weak tea and discussing a particularly dense historical novel, I found myself confiding in Martha, a kind, sensible woman. "Martha," I began, my voice barely a whisper. I think I'm losing my mind. I keep hearing Rose, her steps, all the time." Martha's face softened with concern. She didn't dismiss me. "Oh, Evelyn, my dear, grief does strange things. Your mind is trying to process such a profound loss. It's natural to feel her presence. Many widows report hearing their loved ones, even seeing them. It's part of the grieving process. But have you considered talking to someone, a professional, just to help you through this difficult time?" Reluctantly, I agreed. The idea of a therapist felt like an admission of madness, a surrender to the irrational. But the fear of genuinely losing my grip on reality was far greater. I found Dr. Emily Chen. She was younger than me, perhaps 40, with kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb every nuance of my distress. She sat across from me in her comfortable, minimalist office, listening patiently, her expression empathetic but unreadable. I recounted everything: the steps, the specific sound, the timings, the phantom smells of lavender and Rose's favorite lilac perfume that sometimes wafted through the house, the cold spots, the opening cupboards, the overwhelming sense of her presence. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Evelyn," she said gently, her voice calm and reassuring, "what you're experiencing is actually quite common among those who are grieving deeply. The brain, in its attempt to cope with such a significant absence, often creates sensory experiences. It's a coping mechanism, a way to keep your loved one close. Auditory hallucinations, even olfactory ones, are not unusual. It doesn't mean you're losing your mind." She explained the psychology of grief, the brain's incredible capacity to adapt, even if that adaptation felt terrifyingly real. She suggested that rather than fighting the experiences, I try to acknowledge them as part of my grief process. "It's your brain's way of holding on to Rose," she said. "It's a testament to the depth of your love for her." She prescribed a mild sedative to help me sleep, stressing that rest was crucial. I left her office feeling a tiny glimmer of relief, a rational explanation, a scientific understanding. I wasn't crazy. It was just grief. My logical mind clung to that. I tried to follow her advice. I acknowledged the steps. "Hello, Rose," I'd whisper to the empty air when I heard them. "I miss you." I tried to accept them as echoes of a love so profound it manifested as sound. But the steps didn't fade. Instead, they seemed to grow bolder, more interactive. One evening, as I sat reading in the living room, I heard the distinct shh-flump, shh-flump stop right outside the living room door. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible tap-tap on the wall. My breath caught. The blood drained from my face. The tap-tap code. Rose and I had invented it years ago. A silly, secret way to communicate across rooms without shouting. 2 taps. "Are you there?" 3 taps. "Come here." 4 taps. "Everything's okay." This was 2 taps. "Are you there?" My heart hammered so hard, I thought it would burst through my chest. This wasn't a phantom sound. This wasn't my grieving brain creating echoes. This was a message. Slowly, my hand trembling, I reached out and tapped twice on the wall beside me. Tap, tap. And then, from the hallway, clear as day, came the reply. Tap, tap. It couldn't be. My rational mind screamed in protest. But my heart, soaring and terrified at the same time, knew. This was Rose. This was real. She wasn't just a memory. She was here, and she was trying to tell me something. Or just, she was reaching out. The terror remained, but now it was intertwined with a profound, almost dizzying hope. What if she needed me? What if she had something to say? The steps, once a haunting reminder of loss, now held the promise of an impossible connection. The world, I realized, was far more mysterious than my logical mind had ever dared to imagine. Chapter 3. Whispers from the Attic. The tap-tap exchange left me shaken, yet invigorated. Dr. Chen's rational explanations, once a comforting balm, now felt woefully inadequate. This wasn't just grief. This wasn't my mind playing tricks. This was Rose, or something that profoundly echoed her, reaching out across an unimaginable divide. The fear was still there, but now it was laced with an almost desperate curiosity. What did she want? What was she trying to tell me? I tried to engage with the steps. I'd ask questions aloud, hesitant at first, then bolder. "Rose, are you here?" The steps would pause, then move, leading me from room to room, sometimes to the kitchen, stopping by the tea cupboard, sometimes to her old sewing room, where her half-finished quilts lay draped over a chair. Still radiating the faint scent of fabric softener and her unique creative energy, the experiences deepened. Cold spots became more distinct, almost chilling. The lilac fragrance became stronger, lingering in certain rooms, as if Rose had just passed through. I'd occasionally catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, a flicker of light, a shadow that seemed to dart away when I turned my head. My logical mind screamed for answers, for scientific proof, for anything that could ground me back in reality. I began to research, not grief, but the history of our house. Old Victorian homes in Salem, a town steeped in history, in folklore, in the spectral. I visited the local historical society, spent hours poring over dusty ledgers and brittle newspaper archives. Our house, built in 1888, had seen many lives. It was owned by a merchant family, the Cranes, for decades. Then, in the 1930s, it passed to a widowed woman, Eleanor Vance. The name caught my attention. There were brief, vague mentions of unexplained occurrences during her residency. Back home, armed with a new sense of purpose, I started to explore our own attic. It was a cavern of forgotten things, old trunks, discarded furniture, boxes of papers from previous owners that Rose and I had simply inherited and never bothered to sort through. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through the grimy attic window. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and neglect. I sifted through boxes, each one a window into a forgotten past. Old letters, business records, tax documents, and then, in a small, unmarked wooden chest tucked away in a dark corner, I found it. A leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, its pages yellowed and brittle. On the first page, in elegant, looping script, was the name. Eleanor Vance. My heart pounded. This was her, the widowed woman from the 1930s. I began to read. Eleanor's life unfolded before me. Her love for her husband, a quiet, scholarly man, and their shared joy. Then, the tragedy, her husband's sudden death from influenza, leaving her alone in this very house. Her grief was palpable on the page, raw and devastating. As I read deeper, my breath hitched. Eleanor described her own experiences in the house after her husband's death. I hear his steps, she wrote, her elegant script trembling across the page. The familiar cadence, ascending the stairs, pausing outside the study door. I smell his pipe tobacco. I feel his presence, a cold spot by the fire. Am I mad? Or is he truly here? The parallels were chilling. The steps, the cold spots, the sensory perceptions. It was almost exactly what I was experiencing. Eleanor's terror, her self-doubt, her desperate longing. It mirrored my own. But then, a distinct difference emerged. Eleanor's entries spoke of a persistent, almost urgent presence. He nudges me, she wrote, leads me to strange places in the house, as if he is trying to show me something I must find. A hidden message, but I am afraid, so deeply afraid. She mentioned a specific, secret hiding place, hinted at in a poem she had transcribed in the back of the journal, a place she believed her husband had left something for her. But her entries became increasingly erratic, filled with fear, before abruptly ending. It seemed she never found what she was looking for. I closed the journal, my mind racing. Rose wasn't just here. She wasn't just a grieving echo. She was acting as a guide, a facilitator, leading me just as Eleanor's husband had tried to lead her. Rose was trying to show me something in this house, something connected to its past, something perhaps that Eleanor had never found. It wasn't just my grief, it was history, a shared, tragic history spanning decades, all contained within these old walls. My pragmatic nature wrestled with the supernatural, but the evidence, the parallels, the sheer improbability of coincidence left me no choice. I needed help, not a therapist to rationalize my grief, but someone who understood the inexplicable, someone who wasn't afraid of shadows and whispers. I remembered hearing about Liam O'Connor, a young local historian in Salem who ran a popular blog and YouTube channel called Salem's Spectral Echoes. He wasn't a sensationalist, but an earnest researcher who approached local folklore and alleged hauntings with a blend of academic curiosity and open-mindedness. He was my last, desperate hope. The steps continued their quiet dance around me, But now they felt less like a haunting and more like an urgent, loving invitation. An invitation to solve a mystery spanning almost a century. Chapter 4: The Researcher and the Resonance. Contacting Liam O'Connor felt like a surrender to the absurd. A retired literature teacher reaching out to a paranormal researcher. But the events in my home, particularly Eleanor Vance's journal, had pushed me beyond the comfortable boundaries of logic. My pragmatic mind still rebelled, but my heart, yearning for connection, for understanding, guided my hand to the phone. Liam was surprisingly professional and earnest. He was in his early 30s, with a thoughtful demeanor and an obvious passion for Salem's history. He listened intently, not with the condescending pity of some, nor the wide-eyed credulity of others. When I showed him Eleanor's journal and explained the chilling parallels, his skepticism visibly wavered, replaced by a keen, academic intrigue. "This is fascinating, Mrs. Holloway," he said, gently turning the brittle pages of Eleanor's journal. "The correlation between your experiences and Ms. Vance's and the distinct tap-tap code, it's highly unusual. Most auditory phenomena are random, indistinct. This suggests intelligence, intent." He proposed setting up recording equipment, high-sensitive audio recorders, motion-activated cameras, EMS, electromagnetic field detectors. "We won't just be listening for sounds," he explained. "We'll be looking for environmental fluctuations, energy changes, anything that might corroborate your experiences or offer a scientific explanation." The thought of cameras in my private home was unsettling, but the yearning for answers, for understanding Rose's persistent presence, outweighed my discomfort. We spent days meticulously placing equipment throughout the house, particularly in areas where I most often heard the steps: the staircase, the kitchen, the bedroom, and especially the attic. The initial recordings were uneventful, just the normal creaks and groans of an old house, the sigh of the wind outside, my own quiet movements. Liam remained patient, encouraging. He suggested that sometimes a presence only manifests when it feels comfortable, or when it has a specific message to convey. Then things began to change. On the audio recordings, faint, rhythmic sounds began to appear. Not always clear, often muffled, but undeniably there. A soft shhh-flump, shhh-flump. Just as I heard it, Liam would isolate the sounds, amplify them. His skepticism chipped away, piece by painstaking piece. "Mrs. Holloway," he said one morning, playing back a particularly clear recording from the main staircase. "Do you hear that? It's distinct, it's consistent, and there's no rational source for it in the environment." His voice held a note of awe. The EMF detector, designed to pick up fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, often associated with alleged paranormal activity, also began to show readings, spikes in specific areas correlating with the times I heard the steps or felt a cold spot. The cold spots themselves were confirmed by thermal cameras, distinct drops in temperature in localized areas, unexplainable by drafts or faulty insulation. "This house, it has a resonance," Liam mused, his eyes scanning the data. "It's as if emotions, intense experiences, can leave an imprint on the environment. And perhaps Rose, in her profound grief and love for you, tapped into that existing energy. She's not a ghost in the traditional sense, perhaps, but a manifestation of that emotional resonance, a deeply loving echo." He delved deeper into the house's history, cross-referencing my journal entries with Eleanor Vance's. He found more details about Eleanor's life, her deep love for her husband, the profound loneliness after his death. He also discovered that Eleanor had been an avid amateur poet, and that the poem in her journal, hinting at a hidden message, was actually one of her own compositions, a lament to her lost love and a plea for connection. The steps, Liam theorized, pointing to a diagram of the house's layout, they're leading you, just as they led Eleanor. She wasn't able to find what her husband tried to show her. But Rose is finishing the task. She's trying to guide you to something that Eleanor either couldn't find, or perhaps something new, something Rose herself left. His words resonated deeply within me. Rose, finishing a task. Rose, still caring for me, even from beyond. The fear was replaced by a profound, almost dizzying sense of connection. My love for Rose had never died, and perhaps hers for me hadn't either. The steps were no longer a haunting. They were a loving embrace, a desperate attempt to communicate, to guide me towards a final hidden truth. The house, once a source of terror, was now a puzzle box, holding the last, most precious secret from the woman I loved more than life itself. And I, with Liam's help, was ready to unlock it. Chapter 5: The Hidden Alcove and the Last Embrace. The revelation that Rose was guiding me, completing Eleanor Vance's unfinished quest within the very walls of our home, filled me with a powerful, almost sacred purpose. The fear that had once gripped me now dissipated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of connection, a driving need to understand her final message. Liam, now fully invested, worked tirelessly, cross-referencing every detail from Eleanor's journal with my own experiences and the data from his equipment. Eleanor's cryptic poem, transcribed at the back of her journal, became our map. It spoke of a hearth's silent gaze, a whisper in the study's shadowed might, and a corner where forgotten solace lies. Liam analyzed the architecture of the old house, looking for inconsistencies, hidden spaces, anything that might align with the poetic clues. The steps, once a source of terror, now felt like a gentle hand, a guiding presence. They were almost constant now, often pausing as if waiting for me to catch up, to understand. They would linger in the study, where James and I often read, then move to the old, unused fireplace, then back to the corner where Rose used to sit with her knitting. The hearth, Liam murmured one afternoon, tracing a finger over Eleanor's faded script. Many old homes have secret compartments around fireplaces, for valuables or letters. We started in the study, where the steps often lingered. The old stone fireplace, cold and unused for decades, seemed to emanate a subtle chill, even when the rest of the room was warm. We tapped along the stones, feeling for loose mortar, for hollow sounds. Liam brought in a small, non-invasive camera, snaking it into every crevice, every dark corner. The work was painstaking. Hours turned into days. I found myself talking to Rose silently. "Show me, my love," I'd whisper. "Help me find it." And then, one evening, as dusk painted the study in shades of purple and gray, I heard the steps. Clearer than ever. Shh-flump, shh-flump. They stopped right in front of the hearth. And then a series of rapid, insistent tap-taps. Not 2, not 3, more, like an excited drum roll. "Liam!" I cried, my voice trembling with excitement. "Here! It's here!" He rushed over. We tapped the stones again, more systematically, and there it was. Just above the mantelpiece, a loose stone, slightly out of alignment. Liam carefully inserted a thin blade, gently prying it open. With a soft click, the stone shifted, revealing a small, dark recess within the brickwork. My heart hammered. This was it, the hidden alcove, the culmination of a century-old mystery, the whisper of Eleanor's past and Rose's final embrace. Liam reached inside, his fingers brushing against something soft. He pulled out a small, velvet-covered box, old, dust-covered, but unmistakably distinct. It wasn't just a box. It was the box where Rose kept her most cherished, intimate treasures. The one I had searched for frantically after she died, convinced it was lost forever. I had thought it simply misplaced, but here it was, hidden. My hands trembled as I took it. The velvet, worn smooth in places, felt impossibly familiar. My fingers found the clasp, and with a soft click, it opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, was a single, intricately carved wooden bird. Rose's favorite, a tiny cardinal, which she always said reminded her of hope, and beneath it, a stack of letters, tied with a delicate, faded blue ribbon. They weren't Eleanor Vance's letters. They were Rose's. My breath caught. Her handwriting. So familiar. I picked up the top one, my vision blurring. It was addressed to me. My dearest Evelyn, it began. The date was just 3 weeks before she died. I started to read, tears streaming down my face. Liam stood quietly beside me, a respectful witness to a moment that transcended the paranormal, delving into the deeply human. The letter wasn't a finished, formal farewell. It was a series of thoughts, of memories, of fears, written over several days. Rose, always intuitive, had known her heart was failing, though she had never truly admitted it to me. She wrote of her profound love for me, her gratitude for our life together, her joy, her laughter, her shared dreams, and then her fears, her fear of leaving me alone, her fear that I, the pragmatist, would struggle with grief, with solitude. She spoke of the house, how it held so many memories, how it was part of our love story. She hinted at the box, her secret hiding place. I leave you something, my love, she wrote, a piece of my heart, where it will be safe if you should ever need to find it. She mentioned the cardinal, a symbol of hope. And remember, my dear Evelyn, love transcends all boundaries, even the ones we cannot see. She had poured out her soul, piece by agonizing piece, a final act of devotion. She must have started writing it, perhaps intending to give it to me, then hidden it, perhaps waiting for the right moment, a moment that never came. The last letter was barely coherent, just a few lines. My heart feels tired, but my love, Evelyn, for you, it never will. Find strength, find joy. I am always with you. It ended abruptly, unfinished. The last words of a soul, preparing for its final journey. I clutched the letters to my chest, sobbing. The steps, the sounds, the scents, the cold spots. It wasn't a ghost, not in the terrifying sense. It was Rose, her boundless love, her desire to protect me, her yearning to leave me with a final comforting message. She had, in her last moments, somehow imprinted her energy, her presence, her undying love onto the very fabric of our home. She had led me, step by agonizing step, not to a terrifying confrontation with the unknown, but to this, to a final, tangible embrace from beyond the veil, to a reassurance that our love, our bond, truly did transcend everything. Chapter 6, The Resonance of Love. The discovery of Rose's letters, Her raw, unfinished farewell brought a catharsis so profound it felt as if a physical weight had been lifted from my soul. The tears I cried were no longer of pain and confusion, but of tender grief, of overwhelming gratitude, and of an inexplicable peace. Rose, my pragmatic, logical mind now understood, had found a way to reach me, to leave me with a final, tangible testament of her undying love. Liam and I sat in the study, the velvet box open between us. He had meticulously documented the find, taken photographs, but his usual scientific detachment had softened. "This, Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice hushed, "this isn't just a discovery. This is a beautiful affirmation of connection, of what love can do, even when faced with the ultimate separation." We decided not to publish the full contents of Rose's private letters, but the story of the steps, Eleanor's journal, and the hidden alcove became a local legend. Liam wrote a respectful article for his blog, maintaining the integrity of the scientific data while acknowledging the deeply personal, spiritual dimension of my experience. The house, once a source of unsettling mystery, became a place of wonder, a testament to the enduring power of love. In the days and weeks that followed, the phantom steps began to fade, gradually, imperceptibly, or perhaps I simply no longer needed to hear them. I had received the message. I had found what Rose intended for me to find. The house no longer felt empty or haunted. It felt full of memories, yes, but also full of a gentle, comforting presence. Rose's presence, not as a tormented spirit, but as a loving echo, a quiet reassurance that she was still here, in the fabric of our shared life, in the warmth of my heart. My conversations with Dr. Emily Chen also shifted. I shared the full story with her, including the letters. She listened, not with skepticism, but with an open mind and profound respect. "Evelyn," she said, her voice filled with admiration, "your journey through grief has been extraordinary. Whether you choose to see this as a psychological manifestation of love or something more transcendent, it has brought you peace, and that is what matters most." She helped me process the remaining grief, not as a burden, but as a part of my story, my identity. I continued to live in the old Victorian. I didn't feel the need to move. The house, once a reminder of absence, was now a sanctuary of presence. I filled it with new memories, new laughter with friends, with the quiet solace of my books. I left Eleanor Vance's journal in the hidden alcove, a quiet tribute to her own unanswered longing, and a silent hope that perhaps, in finding solace myself, I had, in some small way, brought peace to her ancient sorrow too. I still kept Rose's old, worn slippers in a special place, near her side of the bed. Sometimes, when the house was very quiet, I'd swear I could still hear a faint shhh-flump in the distance, a gentle whisper from a love that defied all boundaries. But it no longer filled me with fear, only with a profound, comforting warmth. I often sat in the study, where the hidden alcove now stood open, revealing the empty space that once held Rose's last words. The little wooden cardinal sat on my desk, a vibrant splash of red against the muted tones of my grief-worn existence. I knew Rose was with me, not as a spectral presence, but as an invisible thread woven into the tapestry of my being. Her love, our love, had simply transformed, deepened, and found a way to bridge the chasm of death. My rational mind remained intact, but my heart had expanded, embracing the profound mystery of a universe where love truly finds a way to echo forever.